Well, hey everyone, thanks for checking out this week's episode of DoD Contract Academy. This week I have Teresa Moon from Parabolis. Hey Teresa, how are you?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm awesome. I'm obligated to have you. I was just on your podcast, so now we're going back and forth. It's one for you, one for me, and then everyone's going to know what we're doing.
Hey, the best kind of relationships are reciprocal, so I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And before we were chatting, before we started this, that specific to your business, so we're going to talk about what they do. I just got a question on another episode exactly about what you guys solve. So maybe why don't we start with that? What is Parabolis? What do they do? Why do people or companies selling to the government care?
Sure. So in a nutshell, we provide lines of credit to government contractors. A little bit more elaborate on that is that if you currently can't obtain, keep, or increase your line of credit with your bank, which is becoming more and more of an issue for businesses of all sizes, then we're a good fit as it pertains to doing business with the federal government. So our only niche that we function in is the federal marketplace. So we only work with government contractors. And we were founded almost 14 years ago by former federal contracting executives who were sitting in the same seat that many of your listeners are right now, recognize that there's a gap between traditional funding, which is what you get from your bank, and the alternative lenders, which at that time, when we came into the marketplace, the other predominant offering on the alternative side was invoice factoring, which can be cumbersome and intrusive in a process. And so they needed something that was going to bridge that gap between the two, be flexible and affordable, and allow people that ability to grow at the pace that they want to grow and not based off of what the parameters are that their lending partner would put in place.
Right. And, the specific question that I got, which I think you just answered, was, hey, Rick, what do we do if we win a government contract? Because, a lot of businesses, especially if they're just getting started, they're so focused on winning that contract right out the gate.
Mm-hmm.
And then they win it. And then it starts dawning on some of them, oh, I'm providing services to the government on this 3-year contract, or I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I have to invoice the government before I get paid, but I have to be able to pay my people, and there might be a gap there. So really, that's one of the things that you guys specialize in, right? Hey, you have a government contract, and we will potentially be able to support you financially until you get that reimbursement. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So that's one of the top 3 reasons that people come to us. It's for those payrolls that happen prior to them getting paid. What do you do? Invoice factoring is not going to help you in that circumstance because you don't have an invoice yet.
Right.
Plus, there are some other nuances in that scenario that can provide some issue with relationship-based issues along those lines. But the majority of the time, it's payroll, operating expenses, things to get you going prior to getting paid. I mean, the federal government always pays their bills. We know that. That's why we take the risk on that we do. But they don't always pay in the timely manner that they tell you that they're going to. So what do you do in those circumstances? And that's why we do what we do.
Is that one of those nuances you're talking about, which is how do we, ensure that we're getting paid, the relationship that's happening there, because everyone's different, right? Every contracting officer is different. Everyone on the receiving end of that. I think I've heard every excuse in the book, but.
Yeah. And then there's those excuses that happen more frequently than we'd like to see. We're heading right into that time of year where we hear the things like CR and government shutdown, and there's a difference between the two. And what does that mean for your business? And will your lending partner help you through that? When we have government shutdown doesn't mean that you stop working on those contracts. The government's going to expect you to pick right back where you were.
That's right.
When they decide that things are copacetic again. And so that's the kind of thing right now that we try to advise in as well, is it's not so much, the normal ebb and flow of it, but it's when these stops and starts that you can't control happen. Traditional lending partners, that's part of the reason why they don't like working with government contractors, because that's a huge risk for them. You're going to go possibly several months without being able to pay on your line. And that's a risk to them that they're not willing to take. So you really have to show even more skin in the game for that. Contract loss. I mean, just because you lose a contract doesn't mean you're never going to do business with the federal government again. Alternative lenders understand that,
Right.
The difference between us and other alternative lenders, though, is something that we refer to as, the ability of that company, that service provider, to have an assignment of claims, which means that they can speak on your behalf. We
Okay.
don't implement a policy like that. So we're a silent partner. When you come on board with us, we'll back you financially, but we're not stepping in and engaging with your contracting officer or the prime or whoever it is that you're doing work and getting paid from. That's between you and them. There's no interaction on our sides.
But it's a great niche, and I think it's one that, it's just, look, most people don't understand federal contracting, right? So they may see the delays, but unlike in a commercial situation where there might be a delay and you might never get paid because
Mhm.
there's 100 different reasons, right? But the government is going to pay you.
Yep.
Again, it may take it might take them 90 days, to get everything through the system, but they're going to pay, even if they, by the way, you mentioned, contract termination, right? The government can terminate for convenience, but there's a recourse because it's the government, right? So, and we've
Mhm.
helped clients do that too. So the government terminates for convenience. They still expect to pay you for what you've done, right? So even
Right.
if that contract terminates because of whatever reason they came up with, you can still, you're writing them, you're asking for, everything, that the program management. If you paid people, maybe you have to even, depending on what kind of contract it is, there might be a couple of weeks where you have to kind of slowly stop what you're doing and get people off, and you can make a case for all of that, and the government
Mhm.
understands that. So,
Mhm.
but it's really a benefit to companies out there that businesses like yours exist that can help them through that, financially,
Mhm.
and give them that backing. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I mean, because you make a living off of helping people get those opportunities, right? Making the most of the time that's spent in front of the opportunity itself and capitalizing on those relationships. And so you go through all of that trouble, not so that on the other side of it, when you actually get what you were aiming for, right? The success is in that contract win. It shouldn't be a setback as to where you're going to get the funding. I mean, a mantra of mine this year has been, if you win it, can you fund it? And I
Yeah.
think all too often, you and I chatted about it on my podcast, all too often in a BD cycle, they don't recognize the need to have those conversations with their executives early on. Because if you bring in your executive when you've already gotten through the capture process, you pretty much already know what you need in order to perform. And so you know what a win is going to look like. But if you don't know that your executives are going to be able to pay for what you're going to promise, that could be a huge issue for you really fast.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And we got a little bit ahead of ourselves because I'm like, hey, I want to know a little bit about you. I want to know the history of Parabolis. We just jumped right into it. So
Yeah.
who's Teresa Moon? Where do you hail from?
All right. Well, I was born and raised, I'm one of those weird native Floridians, born and raised in Orlando. I have both of my degrees from University of Central Florida. And so I'm very proud alum of UCF. But I have 2 degrees in literature. So in some circles, I have no business being involved with a financial company. However, my background is in business development and capture with government contracting. So I started my career in government contracting in the staffing industry.
Mhm.
Won a couple of contracts based off of some really tight connections and relationships that I had here in the Orlando area.
Wait, so did
Um,
you, but you, so you, you majored in literature.
yep.
So what was the plan? Was the plan teaching or writing or something? And
Absolutely. I wanted to be a college professor. And
okay.
one of my mentors, when I was leewaying into deciding whether or not I was going to get my PhD, he said, "You know what? Personality like yours, you need to get into sales." And I was devastated. I was like, "What? I want to be like you." And he goes, "I know, but you can make a hell of a lot more money getting into sales
That's for
than
sure.
being a career, educator." And I said, "I get it, but I did go that route. I have my master's degree in English. I worked at UCF for a while as an adjunct professor. Then I worked at a technical college. I even did a stint for 3 years working at my alma mater here in Orlando. And then realized pretty quickly that the amount of time you spend and the money in return for it could have been better probably spent doing something that was going to put a little bit more money in my pocket, my savings account.
Yeah.
So I thankfully have not had to abandon it. Parabolis allows me to be that education spokespiece for our company.
Yeah.
So I get to do my 2 favorite things. I get to help people learn at the level that they're able to receive the information, but I get to make a good living while I'm doing it and have a good time too.
So did you think that, which is awesome, by the way, if you can combine what you're doing, I like that. And I have a degree in philosophy, so I probably had no business flying airplanes or doing what I'm business now, but I fixed that later on. So although really interesting stuff there, I think, if you spend time going to school, it really should be what you're interested in.
Yeah.
Um, Now, did you think government contracting, so after you kind of pursued, being a professor and doing
Mhm.
some things related to your master's degree and looking at the PhD, was it, hey, I'm going to go, because you mentioned a firm you worked with and started talking about winning a contract. Was it, hey, I want to get involved with this, or was it happenstance that they were going for federal contracts and you were there, or?
I live, like I said, in Orlando, which is the
Mhm.
simulation training, capital of the world, if you will.
Yeah.
So, working for a staffing company in the IT and engineering department, doing business development, a lot of the jobs that I was going after to bring in were for government contractors. So, when I looked at it from a contract on my own perspective, I fell into it because of a relationship. I had a mentor in town that gave me the Shipley manual, right? He told me to look at it and let him know what I thought. As you know, it's like this thick. And I thought, well, I think it's too long and I'm not interested. Well, part of being, the salesperson that I was making new connections. And one of the new connections that I was trying to make inadvertently turned into a contract opportunity. I was calling the chief, CHR person for a subcontractor of a large prime.
Mhm.
And they were working with a large staffing firm that just wasn't fitting the bill. They weren't anteing up on what they had promised. So when the re-up came in, they got rid of them and put us in as the sub as it pertained to certain criteria of positions, and they were very
Right.
highly technical and all the highest level securities necessary too. So they're very difficult to fill. However, my relationship with that person is why we got it. She said, I know you're going to answer the phone on Sunday if I need you. You let me know where you are in your process. You're not going to just not answer the phone or never talk to us ever again. And so
Yeah.
I learned really quickly that, having those personal, connections with people and those personal relationships can turn over, great opportunities, and government contracting is just another industry that did that. So there was a
Yeah.
lot of learning curve, as you know. I mean, you talk about it a lot on your program as well. There's a lot of acronyms that I wasn't aware of. There's a lot of organizations that I needed to become a part of. So it's been a long haul, and I've had to
Yeah.
do a lot of continuous homework. I still do every day, try to read something new on something within the industry that I'm not super well versed on. But I love it. I'm a consummate academic, whether I'm a teacher or not. I love to learn new stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you can really geek out on all the information, and I do as well for federal contracting. No,
Mhm.
that's really interesting that's the way it went for you. And relationships are what win contracts.
Mhm.
For the government, I mean, in commercially as well, but it just has to be approached a little bit of a different way. In fact, I've said this a million times, but like the best government salesperson I ever met was like, "Hey, Rick, one thing you have to do to win contracts, and that's get meetings and just develop that relationship." And that's
Mhm.
really true. So if you kind of separate all the other BS and all the regs and requirements, it's kind of who you know and who you intentionally develop those relationships with.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important for, business owners to outsource that portion to someone who really knows how to do that. You don't
Yeah.
necessarily have to be the technical expert that you are. I can be an advocate for a company. I do it for my client base. When
Yeah.
I know enough about what they do and I'm in front of a relationship that I have, whether it's a contracting officer or someone within acquisition at an agency, and I hear them talking about a need that they have, I'm like, you know what? I have a client that does that. Let me connect you with them. I don't need to regurgitate too much of their capability statement in it. All I do is make the connection and say, hey, government agency friend, this is
Hmm.
my client who I trust. I think they'd be a good fit. I think you should, give them a chat and let them and have a chat with them. And
Yeah.
so you're right. That human to human interaction, no matter where we are, it's still, paramount to everything else.
Yeah. Those warm connections a lot of contracts have happened because of introductions just like the one you described. So,
Mhm.
okay. So how did you get from there to Parabolis?
Sure. So I was working for, during COVID, everyone was 1099, right?
Mm.
So I was doing independent BD for a local cybersecurity contractor, literally as CMMC was being rolled out.
Okay.
And a lot of our being a small company, we were competing against a lot of larger cybersecurity companies. And I got a lot of pushback in my sales process about why does it cost so much? So I talked with some, mentors, and they said, you're going to have to find a middleman. I'm like, what the heck is that? They said, you need to find someone outside of the bank that can provide these people with the funding they need so they can keep doing business. So if this
Yeah.
CMMC thing rolls down the pipe faster than people think, and then they know who to call when they need to start having implementation and remediation done. I said, okay. So I reached out to Parabolis to be my middleman. Hey, can you come on the
Oh,
call with me?
interesting.
Yeah. So when it comes down to, why does it cost so much? You could step in and say, hey, it's not what it costs, it's the need, right? And if this is an operating expense of yours that you aren't capable in your current lending situation to afford, then we can be an option for you to look into. And so I made a couple of connections with them. And they said, since you're doing independent BD for them, you want to come and do that for us? And I said, no, but I'll come and work for you full time if that's what you want. And the rest is history.
It's funny. I mean, this typically I'm not talking about how to go out and get a job, but that's, exactly how I get a lot of my clients and a
Hmm.
lot of additional work is same way. I reach out to one company for one client, we work
Hmm.
a deal and they're like, hey, why don't you do the same thing for us? And,
Yeah.
maybe sweeten the pot a little bit. No, that's
Yeah.
awesome. So you bring up something interesting. So it's funny how these conversations can go in directions you didn't intentionally go
Right.
into. But so you brought up CMMC, and so
Hmm.
you're right that this is, first of all, it's coming, and there's a cost associated with it.
Hmm.
FedRAMP is another one that is by and large a bigger cost for companies if that's a place they need to go. Is that
Yep.
something Parabolis will help with, is funding? Because getting, going through the process of getting like a 3PAO to come in and FedRAMP certify you,
Hmm.
or CMMC, just going through and having someone do your assessments for all of the NIST requirements. It's cost, and it's one that a lot of small businesses wonder if it's necessary, which it's going to be if it's not necessary
Hmm.
already. And how do I pay for it?
Absolutely. So, as it pertains to it being a specific service that we provide CMMC funding, no. But what we find is that people who have a business and they have difficulty figuring out how they would make having something like this done work for them on a
Mhm.
monetary, perspective, then that's probably someone that has a relationship with their bank that isn't going to be willing to expand on that line of credit that's currently in place, or
Mhm.
they currently have some other type of alternative lending in place that wouldn't lend itself to that. So we just talk to them about what their current solution is and what they don't get with that solution that is necessary with it. Because as you probably know, and I'm sure a lot of your listenership understands, the difference between implementation, remediation, and actually being certified by a third party assessor, that's all separate, right? You go to
Mhm.
different people for that. Your assessor is
Yeah.
not going to do all of that for you. So you're going to be, and the fact that there's such a limited amount of these third party assessors that are available.
Yeah.
I know three, right? So, and I think about it from a regional perspective. If you're in the South, I'm going to introduce you to one. If you're in the DMV, I'm going to introduce you to someone else. If you're out West, I have someone, in the Texas area that I can refer you to. But I think, and it is, like you said, it's not an if, it's when, because it is going to be rolled out across not just DoD, but everyone else, because this is just the framework for everyone. But I
Yeah.
think if you have difficulty figuring out how this is going to fit into your operating expenses on a whole, your lending experience right now is missing something. So let's talk about what are your needs, where are you trying to go, what's your current option that you're utilizing, and how do you make that more robust. And
Yeah.
your bank might not be the best option for that. It doesn't mean forever, but just for right now. And so alternative lending is put in place in the marketplace to fill the gap between what a bank can and can't do. It
Yeah.
isn't to replace necessarily a bank forever, because most of us, that's all we do. We only do lines of credit. We're not doing treasury management. We're not doing deposit accounts. We're not doing any of those types of things for you. So we work with your bank. Most likely, if you go to your bank and you're a government contractor and you ask them who their alternative lender is, if I'm doing my job right, they're going to say me.
Well, that's good. That's good. And you need, by the way, I would want to work with somebody that understands the federal contracting process, so I didn't have to
Mhm.
explain it, over and over
Yeah.
again. But like this time of year, you mentioned, how things can be a little tricky. You also have the fact that, the fiscal year is about to end and there's
Hmm.
the fiscal year. So often agencies just don't get their money on October 1st. A lot of, that although a lot of companies think that that's what happens, a lot of times there
Hmm.
can be months of delay before they even
Hmm.
get that funding. So just trying to explain that process to, a financial institution, I think would be um, I don't know, challenging and something that you wouldn't necessarily want to have to go through over and over again.
Well, yeah, because just because they might be able to wrap their brain around it doesn't mean they're going to be able to make it work for you,
Yeah.
right? Because that's a big risk for them. I mean, your banker is your most heavily regulated partner that you're going to have that's helping you with your business. They can't
Yeah.
help the fact that there's federal regulations and there's bank covenants and there's all of these stipulations that make it more difficult more now than ever for them to actually lend you money because that isn't the money maker for them. The bank doesn't make money off of a line of credit,
Right.
right? Bank makes money off of their deposit accounts and their treasury management.
Hmm.
So they're looking more for fulfilling that side of it. So that's why they're not going to overextend themselves on a line of credit for something that presumes a huge risk for them. But to your point as well, if it's a bank or a banker that knows nothing about how government contracting works, you'll be spinning your wheels a lot trying to explain it to them because anyone that's had to go from a commercial market into the government contracting market knows there's a huge education gap there. It doesn't function the same. There are, stops and starts that isn't, conducive to the way that things work in a commercial market. And if a banker isn't familiar with that, they might not be able to ever meet you where you are because they just don't understand. They don't know what they don't know.
Yeah. Interesting. So if I'm a small business, listening to this, and maybe I've won my first contract or about to, and I'm looking for people to work with, one of the questions I would have is, do you work with all kinds of small businesses or companies, or is it just a certain industry that you're working with? Could you give us
Mhm.
maybe an example?
Sure. I mean, it's a very broad spectrum, right? We say service providers and government resellers
Hmm.
because based off of those two parameters, it's multiple industries that fit into that.
Yeah.
There are some that make it difficult for us. We're a financial provider. So what does that mean? Just like a bank, we take first lien in the first position, if you will, in
Hmm.
that lending relationship. So if you've got something good going with your bank and you can't let that go, that could cause an issue with you being able to do business with us in some circumstances, not all, right? Because
Yeah.
we're not cookie cutter. We do make the attempt to give you what you need when you need it, not something that we're, jamming a square peg into a round hole. They're service providers, it's very broad, right? Government resellers are people that are basically the middleman for goods that they provide. There's a lot of opportunity there for multiple industries and agency support there. So for that purpose, we're an easy talk to, right? But your bank is always going to be first. You go to your bank, you set up your operating account, you set up, direct deposit for your employees, all that good stuff. I think first thing is understand what their process is. Ask your
Hmm.
bank, how long before I'm going to be able to qualify for a line of credit with you? What do you need to see from me in order to decide whether or not I qualify? What does that look like, both in financial reporting and in sustainable growth? Is it a
Right.
dollar amount? Is it a certain time period? Is it both? And in the event you can't provide me that line of credit, what alternative lenders do you work with? And go a step further, either even to that. What clients of yours have had experience with this alternative lender that I can reach out to that can say, hey, I worked with Teresa, for a certain amount of time. And then I came back to the bank and this was my experience. I think there's a lot to be said with just being empowered with what you don't know, because just because you're a great business owner doesn't mean you know anything about cash flow versus
Right.
profit. And that's very different. And
It
cash
is.
flow is more important than profit. Um, because I going to these events and speaking with businesses that are profitable, but they also are functioning at a loss because
Yeah.
they're bringing in a profit, but they're also spending more than they're making.
Hmm.
So, there's a big, key is to have a really good CPA, and someone who understands government contracting as well for audit purposes and things like that. But there's a couple of really key things that you can put in place really early on to safeguard that you don't run into any issues when it comes to being able to acquire the lending that you need to perform on your contracts.
Okay. No, that's great advice. Now, so you're talking about service and resellers, and there's a lot of different services. Well, what about software as a service? So if I was selling software, is that something that, you could work with us, or is it just, hey, I'm putting 10 people that can do cybersecurity in an Air Force unit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we always say if we can draw a straight line back from you to the federal government, we're going to help you fund it.
Okay.
That's the collateral for a parabolist line of credit is a federal contract. Anything that's backed by the FAR, which to your point earlier, that guarantees payment, right? So the FAR will make sure that long term or short term, you're going to get paid.
Yeah.
And so that's the contingency that we look for. So long as it's backed by the federal government, whether as a sub or a prime, we're able to assist.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. I think a lot of at least newer companies don't think about the value of that federal contract. It's also something that increases the value of your business. So if you start
Mhm,
collecting these federal contracts, that's guaranteed money, right? So that's
mhm.
coming in barring some disaster, right? So are you not,
Yep.
performing? So yeah, if you're going to sell your business, it's another great way to increase the valuation essentially if you're start selling to the government. What's
Yeah.
interesting. So now let's talk a little bit more about your role at Parabola. So you're the business developer there, lead business developer, I think you said.
Mhm.
So what type of activities are you working on there?
So I'm the connector. I provide a lot of educational information for the
Mhm.
general public, right? So I travel around the country to conferences and events and different organization outlets that allow me some time to chat with businesses of all sizes and in all positions or stages within the life cycle of their business to talk with them about what are the options available to them at each stage of growth.
Mhm.
Give arm them with information that they can go to their current or future lending partners with so that they can find out if it's a good fit. But just
Yeah.
making sure that people are aware of the options that are available. So, knowledge is power. It's cliche, but it is. And so, talking about financing, even for the smartest of people, I was at an event in Detroit about a month ago, and it was a huge consortium of DoD businesses. And one of the young ladies that I had the privilege of talking to is a rocket scientist. And she said, "Well, what do you do?" And I started telling her, and her eyes started to glaze over. And I
Ah,
said, I get it, right? Just because she's a rocket scientist and is smart as hell doesn't mean that she knows the ins and outs of my industry any more than I know what it's like to be a rocket scientist.
right.
But your lending should not be rocket science. It shouldn't be hard for you to follow. So that's the difference, right? So you can shed some light on it. But people tend to get very insecure about having those conversations because it's usually fear based. It's two
Yeah.
reasons. They think, number one, that they're going to ask a stupid question and make themselves look like they're not intelligent on their ability to grow, and that's just not true. Or number two, they think that because their business needs funding, that means their business is failing to some extent, and that's also not true. So I think the best place that people can learn the most is attending obviously sessions that chat about the needs that they have for their business, but with other business owners who might be a little bit further along in their journey that can say, what, this is what worked for me and this is what didn't work for me. So you don't need to make the same mistake that I did because
Yeah.
this is what happened when I did. And so I think if we lend ourselves to a little vulnerability and talk with other business leaders about what that process looked like for them, they can save themselves, a lot of heartache and a lot of, time not well spent, right? Because
Yeah.
time is money. And as a business leader, you don't have time to be wasting money, on anything. So wasting time having a conversation that is fruitless is not something you should be carving out in your calendar for. I also do head up the strategic partnerships for us, so I'm involved in a lot of organizations. We support women impacting public policy. We
Mhm.
support the National Hub Zone Council. We support veteran organizations like VIP and NVSBC. Business development
Mhm.
groups such as yours that we can refer to our companies that work with us and say, hey, do you need help getting in front of the right people and gaining a contract? You need to call Rick and his team. We try to look beyond the tip of our nose. Being that we were founded by former federal contracting executives, we know that there's more to your life cycle than just us. So
Right.
if something is more needed today than us, and it's outside the walls of Parabolas, we're just as likely to tell you about that first as I would be to tell you about what we do. I mean, I think it's all about, our chairman of the board is Dr. Edward Bursoff, and he says that we can all do well if first we start by doing good.
Yeah.
And so if doing good by you is telling you about a CPA and then talking about funding some other time or maybe never, that's enough. If we can build enough of a groundswell of businesses doing well because they had people who were willing to give more of their time than just what was going to put money in their bank account, then I think, there's plenty of business out there. I'm happy to do it this way.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think that's the hallmark of a successful business is being unselfish, provide as much as you can. And if you're not the right fit, hey, I happen to know somebody that is, because things always,
Absolutely.
always come around. And that's kind of the way the
Hmm.
world works. I also feel there's some parallels to what you're doing and what I'm doing, because as you mentioned, some people's eyes glaze over when you're talking about finances. Exact same thing. If I start talking about the federal contracting process, I could put at least my wife and her friends to sleep real fast, if not if not half the people listening to me on here. So, you got to find a way to make it a little more entertaining. Oh,
Yeah, I'm.
yeah.
I think with all the acronyms alone, right? It can
Ugh,
be not only boring, but very, very, very. You know, it makes people insecure. Just at bottom line, right? It's like it is. It there's a lot of information, and a
yeah.
lot of it changes very quickly.
Oh,
And acronyms don't all, it's not just the letters; they're pronounced a certain way too. And
yeah.
you look like you don't know what you're talking about if you don't pronounce them properly. So
Well,
I
and
think,
different agencies have different acronyms too, different federal agencies. So you can
yeah,
go from the Army to the Navy to the VA to DOE and be
yeah,
talking about, you could have one acronym mean something different in each of those places.
right.
Crazy. Unreal.
Yeah, and so that's intimidating. So it's good that if we can just disarm the marketplace by being, careful and deliberate with how we're treating one another in a kind way.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. Incidentally, I also talked to a rocket scientist a couple days ago on this podcast, and we talked about rocket science and government contracting. So it's like a
Well,
double. People better drink their coffee before they listen to that one. So you have a teaching background, and you seem to be pretty excited about the subject matter. What books would you recommend if someone wants to learn? It doesn't have to be government contracting related, but maybe
mhm.
finance or just understanding money a little bit better or their business. Is there anything that comes to mind that people might want to pick up and read and learn a little bit more about?
Yeah, I'm always interested in what makes businesses succeed. So a lot of what I'm one of those nerds that listens to books. So I've got my Audible account, and while I'm exercising, I listen to books. And so
Mhm,
I love the leadership books by Simon Sinek. So I've
mhm.
read a lot of his stuff. But in our industry, I think more than anything else is just understanding how you get from good to better to the best you're going to be. So I've read The Tipping Point, by Malcolm Gladwell.
Yep.
Our CEO swears by it. Parabolis is grateful to be in a tipping point atmosphere right now for our business. That we're very fortunate to have done as well as we have. Um, but I think another book to go off of that, read that first, and then read Good to Great. Talks about a
Mm,
lot of companies
yeah.
that were, able to take it to the next level that may have been outshined at certain circumstances, but there were certain leadership that was put in place and tactics that were put in place that made the difference. And I think that more than anything else, because, if funding or finance or that type of thing is not your bag, a book on it is going to bore you to tears. But learning what other business leaders did to get from one level to the next and accelerate their growth or to do better in the industry, I think that's always interesting to see because you can learn something from that. Whether you can implement it or not, there are certain parts of it that you will be able to. And I think a lot of it is in putting the right people around you and trusting that you've made the right decision and letting those people have autonomy in what they do. I'm super privileged to work for very, very smart people who have empowered me to feel secure with my abilities and to make decisions for the better of our company based off of those abilities. And so I feel very, supported when I'm going and doing things. I don't have to, look for approval for everything that I'm doing because they know the end of the day, I'm a good person. I'm not going to do something that's going to, put a tarnish our reputation.
Right.
So go out there and have some fun, make some mistakes even, but don't be afraid to keep pushing and keep trying to make those connections. If nothing else, I'm meeting people so that I have someone to introduce someone else to, and it might be a need of theirs that we can't provide to them.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Those are all great books. And I think just also illustrating your point about not only the books you recommended, but your kind of CEO recommending them and enabling you to do things. The fact that you're the one that's doing the podcast interview with me, most companies, the CEO might not be open to letting
Mhm.
somebody else in the company represent them on a podcast or an interview or somewhere else. So I think that
Yeah.
says a lot about your business, and hopefully, everyone listening also senses your enthusiasm and that your knowledge level, and also, what kind of company it is that you're working for. I know we're coming close to running out of time here. Is there any parting advice that you give to our budding small businesses that are trying to sell to the government? And then, of course, also, how can they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think that's the easiest connection, and then we can, one-off chat, and emails, and phone calls. So I'm very, very active on LinkedIn because I'm traveling all over the place, and I want to make sure that I'm meeting someone when I get there. But I think, you know, something that has always been impactful to me is exactly your point that you were saying. My leadership empowers me to feel good about who I am, enough so that I can be a representative on a very large scale for our company itself. And I think that that's important. I think sometimes we try to hold on too tight to the reins. And because of that, we might be stifling people who might otherwise be able to do a really great job for us at whatever they do great. So building a team around you, I think if your core objective is to find good people, people who will understand your ethos and be able to ingest that and make it a part of their practice, but putting the right people in place that you can actually step back and say, I trust them to go and do what's best for our business. The faster you start growing a strong team around you, the easier it'll be for you to stay in your lane and do what you do well.
Yeah.
um, our CEO owned government contractors before he came to our company, and he said, the key roles that you're filling need to be, the people that you're putting in place need to be able to do that particular position better than you can. And
Yeah.
so, and I think that's key. And then trusting the process with that. There's lots of financial advice that I can give and things like that. And so, if you want to talk boring, call me on the line and we'll talk about that. But I think more than anything else is just finding good people that you trust and allowing them to have the ability to do what they do well. Happy people work hard, and if
Yeah.
people know that you appreciate them for what they do, they're going to work really hard for you. It doesn't have to be forever, but if they feel appreciated, they're going to give you 100%. And I feel a sense of ownership and pride in my company, even though I'm not an owner. But I work every day like I am because I love what I do, and because of that, I wake up happy doing what I do. So I'm really grateful.
Well, I'm sold. I know who I'm calling when I need some funding for some of the federal contracts here. So, hey, we really appreciate you coming on, Teresa. This has been great. Also, for the people listening, this is not a topic we cover all the time. We usually focus on how to win those government contracts and how to start and get the ball rolling. But this is a critical piece of information you're learning here on the podcast that's going to help you be successful after you win those contracts. So,
Mhm.
thanks again, Teresa. We'll leave all of the links to your LinkedIn and the company website in the show notes. And yeah, just thanks again for coming on.
Awesome. I appreciate it very much, and I hope we can chat again soon.
All right. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening to this show with Teresa and Parabolis. If you want to learn more, you can check out the links in the show notes, or you could head on over to dodcontract.com, where we'll have the script and the video up. And thanks again.
Thank you.